The forest was silent except for the sound of broken branches under Tom's boots. His ship had crashed 2 days ago, and he was still trying to understand the land he had fallen into. The air was fresh but filled with strange scents he could not name. Trees with wide silver leaves towered above him, and glowing vines curled down like ropes. He had not seen a single human face since the crash. Tom was tired and thirsty. His canteen was almost empty, and he had not found clean water since morning. He pushed through the tall grass, listening to the buzz of insect-like creatures that darted around his head. Every sound made him alert. He was alone on an unknown world, and he did not know what lived here. Then he heard it. A cry. High, sharp, and filled with fear. He froze. At first, he thought it was an animal, but the cry came again, this time sounding like words, though not in any language he understood. It was a voice. Tom ran toward the sound. His boots hit loose stones as the forest opened into a rocky slope. At the edge of the slope was a cliff. He looked down and felt his heart tighten. A small figure clung to the side of the cliff, trapped between sliding rocks. It was a child. Her skin was pale with a faint shimmer, almost glowing, and patterns like light danced across her arms. Her eyes were wide, and her hands gripped the rough stone so hard that her knuckles turned white. She was slipping little by little, and the rocks under her feet gave way each time she tried to move. Tom did not think. He dropped his pack and slid down toward her. "Hold on," he shouted, even though he knew she might not understand his words. His voice carried urgency, and that was enough. The child's eyes turned to him. She looked both scared and hopeful. Tom reached out, but she was too far. He searched quickly and found a thick vine hanging from the cliffside. He pulled it, testing its strength. It held. He tied it around a rock and lowered himself closer. The ground shook slightly as more pebbles rolled down. The girl screamed again, her small feet slipping. "Don't let go!" Tom yelled. He pushed his body forward, stretching his arm as far as it would go. Finally, his hand caught her wrist. Her skin felt cool, almost like touching soft glass. She gasped, but she did not pull away. He gritted his teeth and pulled with all his strength. Bit by bit, he lifted her away from the crumbling edge. His boots scraped against the stone, but he kept climbing upward. At last, they reached stable ground. Tom pulled her onto the flat surface, both of them breathing hard. He sat for a moment, his chest rising and falling, sweat dripping down his forehead. The girl sat across from him, staring. Her eyes were large, glowing faintly in the shade. She tilted her head as if trying to understand who he was. She said something in her language, soft and musical, though Tom could not understand. He pointed at her, then at the cliff, then placed his hand on his chest. "Safe," he said slowly. The girl blinked, then nodded as if she understood. She touched his arm gently, her small fingers tracing the fabric of his jacket. Then she smiled a simple, innocent smile of relief. Tom smiled back without thinking. He had no idea who she was, or why she had those strange glowing marks, but she was alive, and that was enough. The girl stood and pointed toward the forest, as if showing him where her home was. But before Tom could decide whether to follow, she spoke a single word. It sounded like Myra. She touched her chest when she said it, so Tom guessed it was her name. "Myra," Tom repeated. He touched his chest. "Tom." Myra tilted her head again, then laughed softly. She repeated his name, though it sounded a little strange in her voice. For a moment, the world felt less empty. Tom had been lost and alone since the crash, but now he had saved someone. He did not know her story, or if she even belonged to a tribe, a village, or something else. But he felt a quiet warmth inside him. He helped Myra stand properly, and they walked a few steps away from the dangerous cliff. She looked back once, her glowing patterns shimmering brighter, perhaps a sign of gratitude. Tom only thought of her as a child who needed help. He had no idea what his action meant. Because far beyond the forest, in a city he had not yet seen, there was a queen searching for her daughter. Tom woke early the next morning. The sun on this strange world was pale blue, and its light made the silver leaves around him shine like metal. He had found a small stream nearby and filled his canteen. His body still ached from pulling the child to safety, but he felt lighter knowing she was safe. Myra had stayed near him through the night. She had not spoken much, but her presence gave him comfort. Her glowing marks seemed to dim while she slept, like soft lanterns fading. Now, in the morning, they glowed brighter again, shifting across her skin in gentle patterns. Tom smiled at her and pointed toward the forest. "Home?" he asked. Myra tilted her head, then nodded. She pointed in one direction, deeper into the land. Tom thought about his crashed ship, the broken radio, and the emptiness of the nights. He had no real plan, and following her might lead him to others. Maybe he could find help. But before they could move, the sound of metal boots echoed through the forest. Tom froze. Myra's eyes widened, and she grabbed his arm, pulling him back behind a tree. Through the tall grass, a group of figures appeared. They were tall, wearing armor that gleamed like polished stone. Strange weapons hung at their sides, and their eyes scanned the ground with sharp focus. "Myra," Tom whispered. She nodded quickly, her hand tightening on his sleeve. She knew who they were. One of the armored figures stopped and pointed to the ground. Tom followed the gesture and realized they had found footprints, his and Myra's. The soldiers moved fast, spreading out in formation. Their voices carried through the air, words he could not understand. Myra let go of his sleeve and ran out from the tree. She shouted loudly, waving her arms. The soldiers turned at once, their eyes wide with shock. They rushed forward, calling her name again and again. Tom heard the word clearly now, "Myra. Myra." The soldiers surrounded her, kneeling as if in respect. Tom stayed hidden for a moment, unsure if they were friend or foe. Then Myra pointed back toward the tree, calling out something in her language. Every armored head turned toward Tom. He stepped out slowly, his hands raised to show he carried no weapon. The soldiers tensed. Their glowing eyes locked on him, and their hands hovered over their strange weapons. Myra ran to him and grabbed his hand, pulling him forward. She spoke quickly to the soldiers, her words sharp but filled with energy. The soldiers looked at one another, then back at Tom. One of them stepped closer. His armor was darker, and the markings on his helmet showed he was a leader. He studied Tom from head to toe, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke in a firm tone, pointing at Tom and then at Myra. Tom did not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They knew he had saved her. The leader raised his arm and gave an order. At once, two soldiers moved to either side of Tom, not threatening, but guiding him forward. Myra clung to his hand, smiling up at him, as if to reassure him it was all right. Tom's stomach tightened. He had no idea where they were taking him, but he sensed this was bigger than he had imagined. Saving a child had felt simple yesterday. Now it felt like stepping into the center of something he did not yet understand. The soldiers led them through the forest. Their steps were steady and disciplined. Tom noticed how the trees seemed to bend away from their path, as if the very forest respected their presence. Myra spoke to one of the soldiers, her voice light and cheerful, and they answered her with respect. After some time, the group reached an open plain. Tom stopped and stared. Rising from the ground ahead was a vast city, shining under the pale sun. Towers carved from stone and crystal reached toward the sky, and bridges stretched between them like webs of light. Walls surrounded the city, but they shimmered with an energy field that hummed in the air. It was unlike anything Tom had ever seen. The soldiers marched straight toward the gate. The guards at the entrance bowed when they saw Myra, their glowing eyes filled with relief. They let the group pass at once. Inside, the city was alive with people. Aliens with glowing patterns on their skin walked the streets, their clothes bright with flowing designs. Shops lined the roads, and strange animals pulled carts that floated slightly above the ground. But as soon as the people saw Myra, everything stopped. Whispers filled the air, and dozens of glowing eyes turned toward her. Then, slowly, the whispers turned to cheers. They called her name with joy, their voices rising like a wave. Tom walked beside her, stunned. Whoever Myra was, she was not just a child. She was someone important. The soldiers led them deeper into the city, toward a wide hall with high doors carved with symbols. The doors opened slowly, and cool air rushed out. Inside was a vast chamber. At the far end, on a raised seat of crystal, sat a tall figure draped in silver robes. Her skin glowed brighter than any other, and her markings shimmered like living light. She looked both beautiful and powerful, her eyes sharp yet filled with something deeper. Myra let go of Tom's hand and ran forward, crying out with joy. The woman rose from her seat, her voice breaking with relief as she called Myra's name. She bent down, embracing the child. Tom stood frozen, his heart pounding. The woman's eyes lifted, meeting his. He realized at once who she was. Myra's mother. The Queen. And she was staring directly at him. The hall was silent except for the soft sound of Myra's laughter as she clung to her mother. The Queen held her close, her long robe glowing faintly in the light that poured through crystal windows. For a moment, Tom almost forgot where he was. He saw only the love of a mother reunited with her child. But then the Queen's gaze shifted. Her eyes, bright and sharp like stars, focused on Tom. The soldiers who had escorted him stepped back, leaving him standing alone in the center of the chamber. He felt dozens of eyes on him, nobles, advisors, and guards lined along the walls, their expressions mixed with curiosity and caution. The Queen slowly released Myra and stood tall. She walked down the steps of her throne with graceful steps, each one echoing through the chamber. Her silver robe shimmered, and the patterns of light across her skin shifted in waves, like living fire. She stopped a few steps away from Tom. For a long moment, she studied him in silence. Tom's heart pounded. He wanted to bow or kneel, but he did not know what was proper here. So he stood still, his hands at his side, waiting. Finally, the Queen spoke. Her voice was calm but carried strength that filled the hall. Though Tom did not know her language, he understood from her tone that she was asking something important. She pointed at Myra, then at him. Myra ran forward, speaking quickly in her mother's tongue. She pointed to the cliff, mimicking how Tom had pulled her up. She stretched her arms wide, showing how close she had been to falling. Then she grabbed Tom's arm and raised it, smiling proudly as if showing a hero to the court. The Queen's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch her daughter's cheek. Then she looked back at Tom and said a word he could not understand, but her hand pressed to her chest as if it carried deep meaning. One of the advisors stepped forward, his face older and marked with lines of glowing light. He spoke in a low voice, bowing slightly to the Queen, then glanced at Tom with suspicion. His words carried doubt. Others in the hall began whispering. Some nodded in agreement with the advisor. Some shook their heads, pointing toward Tom with interest. The sound rose and fell like waves against stone. The Queen raised her hand, and silence fell at once. Her gaze never left Tom as she spoke again, this time slowly, with weight behind each word. The leader of the guards translated into broken human speech, his voice deep and steady. The Queen says, by saving her daughter, you are bound. You belong to her clan now. Tom's eyes widened. Belong, he whispered. The guard nodded. It is sacred law. No one may break it. The words echoed in Tom's mind. He thought he had only done what anyone would help a child in danger. But to them, it was more than kindness. It was a bond, a tie to their royal family. Myra clapped her hands and smiled at him, clearly happy with the decision. She hugged his arm as if to say he was already one of them. But the advisor who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. He pointed at Tom with sharp movements, his voice rising. His glowing eyes narrowed with distrust. From his tone, Tom could tell he was protesting the Queen's decision. The Queen did not look at him. She raised her chin and spoke firmly, her voice filled with authority. The advisor fell silent, bowing reluctantly. Then she turned back to Tom. She stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger in them, only curiosity and resolve. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder. The light from her markings glowed brighter, and the whole hall seemed to breathe as if something powerful had just been decided. The guards slammed the ends of their spears on the floor in unison, a sound of agreement and respect. The nobles whispered again, but this time with awe. Tom stood frozen, unsure of what he had just agreed to without words. The Queen released his shoulder and spoke once more. The guard translated again. The Queen says you are no longer an outsider. You are of her bloodline's protection. You will live among us, and our laws will guide you. Tom swallowed hard. He wanted to protest, to say he had not asked for this. But Myra looked up at him with glowing eyes filled with trust. And deep inside, Tom felt something shift. He had been alone since his crash. Now, for the first time, someone was telling him he had a place. The Queen turned and walked back to her throne. She raised her hand, and the hall erupted in cheers. The people's voices echoed through the chamber, calling his name, though they spoke it in their own tongue, shaping it with their accents. Tom. The sound was strange, but powerful. He stood there, unsure whether to feel honored or trapped. What did it truly mean to belong to this clan? What duties would they expect from him? But one thing was certain. His life had changed forever. The days that followed were unlike anything Tom had ever known. The Queen's city was vast, filled with tall towers, bridges of light, and streets alive with glowing patterns that ran across the stone like rivers of fire. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him. Some were curious, some respectful, but others were sharp with doubt. The Queen had given him a place in her palace. The room was wide, with soft walls that shifted color to match the light of the day. Food was brought to him, strange fruits that glowed faintly, bread that tasted sweet and soft, and water that sparkled like crystal. Tom was thankful, but he still felt like a stranger in a world that did not belong to him. Myra visited him often. She laughed and pointed at objects, saying their names in her language. Tom repeated the sounds, stumbling but trying. She clapped her hands whenever he got close to the right word. Slowly, he learned simple phrases: hello, thank you, water, food. Myra was patient, and her smile made the lessons less heavy. But not everyone welcomed him. One morning, he was led into a training hall by two guards. Inside, a group of warriors stood in rows, practicing with long staffs that glowed at the tips. Their movements were smooth, almost like a dance, each strike flowing into the next. At the front, an elder warrior with a scar across his glowing markings turned and looked at Tom with clear dislike. "This is strange," the guard beside Tom whispered in broken human words. "The Queen asked he learn our ways." The elder warrior stepped forward, his staff tapping against the floor. He spoke loudly, his voice sharp. Though Tom could not understand every word, the tone carried challenge. The warriors behind him laughed, shaking their heads. Tom knew what it meant. He was being tested. The elder handed him a staff. It was heavier than it looked, humming with faint energy. Tom held it awkwardly, adjusting his grip. The elder swung his own staff in a quick move, stopping inches from Tom's chest. The warriors chuckled again. Tom's face burned, but he refused to back down. He raised his staff. His stance was clumsy, but he remembered lessons from Earth's simple self-defense drills he had practiced long ago. The elder struck again, faster this time. Tom blocked, though the impact nearly knocked the staff from his hands. The warriors laughed louder, but Myra's voice suddenly echoed across the hall. She had slipped in quietly, watching. She shouted something at the warriors, her words fierce. They grew silent, though some still smirked. The elder narrowed his eyes and attacked once more, harder and sharper. Tom ducked clumsily, then swung his staff in return. It was not graceful, but it forced the elder to step back. The hall grew silent. Tom breathed heavily, sweat on his forehead. He tightened his grip and stood ready. For the first time, the elder looked at him with a flicker of respect. He lowered his staff and gave a single nod. The warriors did not laugh again. Later, Myra explained to Tom with simple words. They test you. They do not trust. But you strong. Her small hand pressed against his arm with pride. Tom smiled, though inside he still felt the weight of their suspicion. The next challenge came not with weapons but with rituals. One evening, the queen invited him to a gathering. The hall was filled with nobles wearing robes that shimmered like the night sky. They sat in circles around bowls of glowing fire, chanting softly. The queen motioned for Tom to sit beside her. An elder brought forward a small cup filled with liquid that shimmered blue. He offered it to Tom. The queen nodded, her expression calm but expectant. Tom hesitated. Was it safe? Was it poison? He looked at Myra, who sat across from him. She smiled and raised her hands, mimicking the act of drinking. Trusting her, Tom lifted the cup and sipped. The liquid was cool, almost like water, but it spread warmth through his chest. The nobles around him nodded slowly, their eyes glowing brighter. It was a sign of acceptance. But still, whispers followed him. Some nobles looked at him as if he were a wild animal in a cage. Others spoke softly, shaking their heads. The elder who had opposed him in the throne room stared with open disapproval. Tom felt the divide clearly. The queen and Myra welcomed him, but not all of her people agreed. He was an outsider who had been given a sacred place, and some believed it dishonored their traditions. That night, lying in his room, Tom thought of Earth. He missed the familiar world he had lost, but he knew he could not return soon. His ship was broken beyond repair. The only path forward was here, among people who half accepted him and half rejected him. Yet one thought gave him strength. Myra's trust. Her smile reminded him why he had risked his life on that cliff. She believed in him, even when others doubted. Tom closed his eyes with a quiet vow. If he truly belonged to this clan now, he would earn it not just through saving a child, but through proving that a human could stand among them with honor. The city glowed under the pale blue sun, its towers bright as crystal. From the outside, it looked peaceful, but inside the palace walls, unease grew. Tom could feel it in every glance, every whisper that followed him down the halls. Some people bowed when they saw him, honoring the queen's decision. Others turned away, muttering words he could not understand but knew carried doubt. He had been marked as part of the queen's clan, but not everyone agreed he belonged. Tom tried to ignore it, spending his days learning more of their language with Myra's help. She was patient, teaching him new words as they walked through gardens or sat beside the glowing streams. He laughed at his mistakes, and she laughed with him, not at him. Her joy gave him comfort. But shadows stirred beyond the city walls. One night, while walking with two guards assigned to him, Tom overheard their hushed voices. He understood only parts of it, but the words rival clan and queen were clear. He frowned, slowing his steps, listening harder. The guards noticed and stopped speaking, their eyes shifting away. That alone was enough to tell him danger was near. The next day, whispers turned into news. The rival clan from the northern valleys had begun gathering forces. They claimed the queen's decision to bind an outsider was an insult to tradition. To them, it was weakness, proof she no longer held the wisdom to rule. The queen called a council. Tom stood near the back of the grand hall, beside Myra. Her small hand gripped his tightly as the nobles argued. Some shouted for war. Others begged for peace. The elder who had opposed Tom before rose and spoke loudly, pointing at him. His voice was harsh, filled with anger. Though Tom could not understand every word, the meaning was clear: he was the reason for this conflict. Tom's chest tightened. He had never wanted to bring trouble to anyone. He only wanted to help Myra that day on the cliff. Now, his action had rippled outward into something far greater. The queen silenced the hall with a single gesture. Her voice was calm but firm as she spoke. The guard near Tom leaned close, whispering a translation. The queen says, "This human is not weakness. He is proof that bonds can grow beyond blood. If the rival clan challenges us, we will stand together." The hall grew silent. Some nobles bowed their heads in respect. Others kept their eyes hard. After the meeting, Tom followed Myra into the garden. The evening light painted the leaves silver. She looked up at him with worried eyes. "They come soon," she said slowly, her words halting but clear. "Fight. Big fight." Tom knelt to meet her gaze. "And your mother?" he asked. "She stand," Myra said. "She strong. But she need all." She touched his chest. "Even you?" Tom did not answer right away. He thought of the battles he had seen back on Earth, the stories of soldiers and wars he had never wanted to join. He was no warrior. Yet here, on this world, he had been given a place, and with it came responsibility. That night, he went to the training hall again. The elder warrior was there, practicing with his staff. When he saw Tom enter, his eyes narrowed. Tom raised a hand in greeting, then pointed at the racks of weapons. He spoke one word he had learned well. "Teach." The elder stared at him, then barked a laugh. But Tom did not move. He stood firm, staff in hand, determination in his eyes. Slowly, the elder's expression changed. He nodded once and struck his staff against Tom's. The lesson began. Day after day, Tom trained. His arms ached, his legs shook, but he pushed forward. He learned to move with the rhythm of their strikes, to use speed rather than strength. His human instincts led him to improvise, to create moves the warriors had never seen. Some laughed at his strange style, but others began to respect it. Myra often watched, clapping when he landed a good strike. Even the elder began to grunt with approval, his sharp eyes softening, if only a little. But training was not enough. Tom remembered the rival clans' talk of numbers. They were preparing for war, and numbers alone could crush even skilled defenders. So he used what he knew best: human problem solving. He studied the city walls, the energy fields, the narrow bridges. He walked with engineers, pointing, drawing in the dirt, showing ways to trap and slow an enemy. At first, they laughed at his odd methods, but when he demonstrated small traps with ropes and stones, their laughter turned to thought. "Human mind," one of the engineers said slowly. "Different. Useful." For the first time, Tom felt he was giving something only he could. Not just swinging a staff, but using his earth-born creativity to protect those who had taken him in. Still, as days passed and reports came of enemy movements, the tension grew. The city that had once been filled with music now held silence in the streets. People looked to the horizon with fear. One evening, Tom stood on a high balcony. The wind carried the sound of distant drums. War drums. Myra stood beside him, clutching his arm. "They come," she whispered. Tom looked at the glowing towers, at the people preparing for battle, and then at Myra's trusting eyes. He had been lost when he came here, just a broken traveler from a broken ship. Now he was something more. He straightened his shoulders. Whatever came, he would not run. If he truly belonged to this clan, then he would stand with them. The morning sky was heavy with clouds, darker than usual. The towers of the Queen's city glowed faintly, as if the light within them was preparing for what was to come. From the high walls, the sound of drums carried through the air. The rival clan was near. Tom stood with the Queen's soldiers on the wall. He held a staff in his hands, its tip glowing with faint energy. Weeks of training had given him strength and confidence, though he still knew he was not a true warrior like the others. Still, he had one thing they did not, the mind of a human who solved problems differently. Myra stood below in the courtyard, beside her mother. She wore a robe with bright patterns that marked her as the Queen's daughter. She waved up at Tom, her eyes glowing with trust. Tom raised his hand in return, forcing himself to smile. He could not let her see his fear. The rival clan appeared on the horizon. Their army moved like a dark wave, shields raised, weapons gleaming. Their banners fluttered, marked with symbols of fire and storm. The ground seemed to tremble as they marched closer. The Queen raised her hand, and silence fell across her walls. Her voice rang out, strong and clear, carrying words of courage. Even though Tom understood little, he felt her meaning. She was telling them they were not just defending walls but defending their people, their home, and their honor. The enemy roared in reply, their voices like thunder. The first clash came quickly. Energy arrows lit the sky, streaking blue and red. Shields shimmered, blocking some, but not all. The walls shook under the impact. Soldiers shouted as the rival clan's warriors rushed forward with ladders and siege beasts, massive creatures covered in armor, carrying platforms on their backs. Tom's heart raced. He remembered his plan. He shouted to the engineers on the wall, using simple words and gestures. They nodded, moving to trigger the traps he had designed. As the beasts reached the base of the wall, hidden panels opened. Weighted nets, woven with glowing threads, dropped down, tangling the creature's legs. The beasts stumbled, crashing into the ladders they carried. The enemy roared in frustration as their first push faltered. Cheers rose from the defenders. Tom gripped his staff tighter. One plan had worked, but the battle was far from over. The rival clan adjusted quickly, bringing forward heavy machines that fired blasts of energy. The walls shuddered under the strikes. Cracks spread along the stone, and pieces fell into the crowd below. Soldiers shouted in panic as the enemy pressed forward again. Tom acted without thinking. He ran to the engineers, pointing at the weakest part of the wall. He waved his arms, signaling them to redirect the energy shield. At first, they hesitated, but then they followed his lead. The shield shifted just in time, catching a massive blast before it could tear a hole through the wall. The soldiers nearby looked at him with surprise and respect. One shouted in their tongue, raising his staff in salute. Tom nodded, breathing hard. But the enemy was relentless. Soon, they reached the gates with rams that glowed with fire. The wood shook with each strike. The Queen herself stepped forward, her robe flowing like silver flame. She raised her arms, and light burst from her markings, forming a barrier of pure energy across the gate. The enemy slammed against it, but the barrier held. Tom could see how much it cost her. The Queen's breath came heavy, her glow flickering. He knew she could not hold it forever. Then, through the smoke and chaos, Tom saw movement. A group of enemy warriors had broken through a side wall. They slipped into the city, heading straight toward the courtyard where Myra stood. His heart froze. Without waiting, he leapt from the wall, landing hard and running through the narrow streets. He pushed past soldiers, shouting Myra's name. He reached the courtyard just as the enemy burst in. Myra screamed, backing toward her mother. The queen turned, but she was still holding the barrier at the gate and could not defend herself in time. Tom charged forward, his staff swinging. He struck the first warrior hard, knocking him down. The second lunged, but Tom ducked and jabbed upward, catching him under the chin. The third raised his blade, but before he could strike, Myra threw a small glowing stone. It burst with light, blinding the attacker long enough for Tom to land another strike. The queen's eyes widened in surprise as Tom stood between her and the enemy. His arms shook, his chest burned, but he did not move aside. He would not let them pass. More soldiers rushed in, driving the attackers back. The courtyard filled with the sounds of battle, then cheers as the enemy was pushed out. Myra ran to Tom, hugging his waist tightly. "You save again," she whispered, her voice trembling. Tom knelt, holding her close. His staff trembled in his hand, but his spirit felt stronger than ever. He looked at the queen, who met his gaze with new respect. The battle outside raged on, but inside the walls, one truth had already been proven. The outsider who was once doubted had stood to protect their queen and her daughter. The rival clan had underestimated him. And they would pay for it. The morning after the battle, the city was quiet. Smoke rose from the edges of the walls where the enemy had struck, but the towers still glowed, proud and strong. Tom walked through the streets with Myra by his side. People stopped to look at him, some smiling, some bowing, and others simply staring in disbelief. He was no longer just a stranger. He had stood in the fight, defended the queen and her daughter, and proved that he belonged to this clan. Myra laughed, skipping ahead a few steps, and then ran back to hold his hand. "They call you hero," she said softly, her eyes shining. Tom shook his head. "No," he replied. "We all fight together." She smiled. "Yes, together," she said. Inside the palace, the queen awaited. Her silver robe glowed faintly, and her markings shimmered like living light. She stood at the entrance to the throne room, watching as Tom and Myra approached. The nobles and guards fell silent. Even the elders who had once doubted him bowed their heads in respect. The queen stepped forward. Her eyes met Tom's, and for the first time, he felt she truly saw him not as an outsider, not as a human who did not belong, but as someone who had earned his place. She spoke in her language, slowly and clearly. The guard near Tom translated. "By your courage, by your mind, and by your heart, you are no longer a guest. You are one of us. You are family." Tom felt a warmth spread through his chest. Words he had never expected now carried weight beyond anything he had known. Family. Belonging. He had come to this world alone, a traveler with no home, no purpose beyond survival. Now, he had both. The queen raised her hand, signaling the hall to pay attention. She walked to Tom, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You saved my daughter and our people," she said. "You have shown us that courage is not measured by blood, but by deeds. You are of my clan, and you will live among us with honor." Myra ran forward, hugging his waist tightly. "Yes. You belong," she exclaimed, her voice filled with joy. The people cheered. Guards lifted their spears, nobles clapped, and even the elders who had doubted him now nodded in approval. Tom felt a mix of pride and humility. He had never imagined that saving one child could change the life of so many, including his own. Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Tom trained with the warriors, learning more about their techniques, their customs, and their ways of life. Myra taught him language and stories of their history. He laughed, stumbled, and learned, feeling more like a member of the clan with each passing day. He visited the markets, walked through glowing gardens, and watched the streams that reflected the towers above. Everywhere he went, people nodded or smiled, showing respect and curiosity. He began to understand the subtle gestures, the words, and the customs that had once seemed strange. One evening, Tom stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Myra was beside him, pointing at the stars as they began to appear. The sky was darker here than on Earth, filled with unknown constellations and streaks of light he could not name. "You look happy," Myra said softly. Tom nodded, his eyes on the glowing towers. "I am," he admitted. "I never thought I would find a place where I belong. But now, I have one." Myra leaned against him. "And we belong to you too," she said. "You are part of us." Tom smiled. The thought made his chest feel light and full at the same time. He had come to this world lost, unsure of his path, and unsure of the people he might meet. Now, he had found more than survival. He had found a family, respect, and a place where his actions mattered. The Queen joined them on the balcony, her presence calm and strong. She placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. "Your courage is remembered," she said. "Your heart is known. You have changed our lives as much as we have changed yours." Tom looked at her, then at Myra, then at the glowing city below. He had been a stranger, a human alone on an alien world. Now he was a part of something greater. He had found belonging, purpose, and trust. The stars shone brightly above them, reflecting in the streams, the towers, and in the eyes of the people he had come to protect. Tom realized that this world, once foreign and frightening, was now home. And he would never forget the day a simple act of saving a child had brought him here, to a place where he truly belonged. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. He turned to Myra and the Queen and smiled. "I am part of your clan," he said quietly, but with pride. "And I will stand with you always." Myra hugged him tightly, the Queen's hand rested gently on his shoulder, and the city behind them pulsed with life. For the first time in his life, Tom felt complete. He was no longer a stranger. He was family.